The police officer looked me dead in the eye and asked, "Did Mr. Dorsey ever give you anything? An envelope? A piece of paper? Anything at all?" I had a coffee mug in my hand at the time, and I felt my fingers suddenly turn ice cold, as if my body had realized before my brain that everything was about to change. I asked what happened, and the second officer told me that Alan Dorsey had passed away, and some irregularities had surfaced regarding his estate. I stood frozen in the doorway, thinking about my neighbor, that 78-year-old man who had never even raised his voice. My name is Olivia Reed, and for the past 13 years I have worked as an estate tax auditor for the Delaware Department of Revenue. My job is to read through the paperwork left behind after someone dies and catch the lies hidden within. But that day, standing at my own front door, I could not figure out whose story I was caught up in, the auditors or the victims. If you also believe that a quiet, kind-looking person can sometimes harbor the biggest secrets, then subscribe to this channel and like the video, because this story has just begun, and what happens next will not be easy for anyone to see coming. That is what I thought at the time, but the real beginning was 3 months earlier, on a cold morning when Alan Dorsey moved into this small apartment complex in Wilmington. I remember it was exactly 7:39 a.m. because I was watching his moving van from my balcony right as I was reading through my first audit case file. Alan did not bring much with him. Just some old wooden crates, a reading chair, and a small safe, which he carried himself with extreme care, refusing to let anyone else touch it. Thanks to my profession, I always pay attention to the little things, like how a person handles their papers, what they carry themselves, and what they hand off to others. Alan did not hand that safe to anyone. Our first encounter happened when his mailbox was left open, and some of his letters started getting soaked in the rain. I picked them up and knocked on his door. He opened it with a very faint smile and said, "You are very kind," words I had not heard from my own family in years. In my own home, I was the one who smoothed over every argument, quietly fixed every mistake, all without a single complaint. With Alan, it was the first time someone had actually noticed my kindness, appreciated it, and maybe that is where this story truly began. Over the next few weeks, my encounters with Alan turned into a routine. Every evening around 6:17 p.m. when I got back from the office, I would find him sitting on his porch, pouring tea from an old thermos. He never asked me for anything, which is exactly what should have struck me as the most unusual thing of all. One evening, he asked me what I did for a living, and when I told him I was an estate tax auditor, something flickered in his eyes for a split second. It was so subtle that if I were not used to catching lies in documents, I probably would not have even noticed it. He changed the subject, asking if I ever got any help from my family with chores or just to talk. I laughed and said that I was the one who helped everyone else. My brother was always in a financial bind, and my mother called me for every little thing. Alan nodded as if he had already guessed my answer. On another evening, he asked me to grab a large brown envelope from my mail that the post office had accidentally dropped in my box. The envelope bore the stamp of the Delaware County Recorder of Deeds. I did not say anything, I just handed it to him. But an auditor's mind never turns off, and I silently made a mental note that the name Nathan Dorsey was also written on that envelope. At the time, I brushed it off as just a family connection and forgot about it. But over the next few weeks, Alan's health took a sudden turn for the worse. One night, at exactly 11:05 p.m., his doorbell rang continuously. I rushed over and found Alan sitting on the floor, struggling to breathe, clutching that same old safe tightly in his hands. It was as if he had forgotten everything else in the world, but not that. The ambulance arrived, and I went along with him because he had no one else there. Sitting in the hospital waiting room, it hit me that this was what I had been doing for the last 13 years, standing calmly through other people's crises without ever telling anyone that sometimes I needed a shoulder to lean on too. My own family never asked if I was okay. They just assumed that Olivia would handle it. When Alan regained consciousness, the first thing he asked was, "Where is the safe?" That struck me as odd. A sick man cared more about a metal box than his own life. If you also have someone in your family who always takes care of everyone else but is never taken care of themselves, definitely let me know in the comments, because I feel like this story is not just mine. And maybe that is exactly why Alan chose me. After returning from the hospital, he asked me for a strange promise. He said, "If something happens to me, look after my papers, just until the right people step forward." I chuckled and asked who the right people were, and he simply replied, "Whoever does the right thing." That night, for the first time, I noticed a file folder sitting on his table with Form 709 handwritten on it. I recognized the name immediately because filing gift tax returns was part of my day job. It is the form someone fills out when they want to gift a large sum of money or property to someone while they are still alive. I did not ask any questions. Professional habit dictates that snooping into documents is wrong unless someone explicitly tells you about them. But a week later, Nathan Dorsey showed up in front of me for the first time, coming to visit his uncle. He shook my hand very warmly and said, "You must be the one taking such good care of my uncle. I am incredibly grateful." But his eyes were not looking at me. They were locked onto that file on the table. And in that moment, I realized for the first time that this visit was not just out of a nephew's concern. The next 2 months passed peacefully. Alan's health recovered a bit, and our evenings went back to the way they were: tea, conversations, and light laughter. But one morning, at exactly 8:23 a.m., I found an ambulance parked outside his apartment. This time, I could not make it in time. Alan Dorsey had passed away in his sleep, peacefully, exactly the way he handled everything in life. Barely 10 people showed up at the funeral, mostly neighbors, and Nathan. He was shaking hands with everyone, repeatedly stating that his uncle had legally left everything to him through a power of attorney a long time ago. That sounded strange to me. How could a man who would not let anyone touch his safe hand over his entire estate to a nephew he hardly ever saw? I did not say a word. I just made a mental note of how quickly and easily Nathan had gotten his hands on that document. And that was the detail that would not let the auditor inside me rest. A week after the funeral, Nathan reached out to me. He said he needed to clear out his uncle's apartment and asked if I could help sort through some personal belongings. I went. I do not know why, maybe because I remembered the promise I made to Alan. I did not find the old safe there, but in a closet, I did find that same file folder with Form 709, still blank, still incomplete. Right next to it was another document, a copy of the power of attorney that Nathan kept flashing around. Given my professional instincts, I took a close look at it, and that was where I spotted the first red flag. The notary stamp had a date from 3 years ago, but in Delaware, a notary commission is only valid for 5 years. When I thought about checking the notary number written under the seal, I remembered that the state website publicly lists the expiration date for every notary. I kept my mouth shut, simply smiled, and said I needed to head home. But that night, I looked up that notary number in my office's database, and what I found sent a slight chill down my spine. That notary commission had expired exactly 19 months ago. This meant that on the day the power of attorney was signed, the person notarizing it was not even legally authorized to do so. According to Delaware law, such a document could be thrown out of court as invalid. I looked at the file again, and suddenly, I remembered that small brown envelope I had handed to Alan months ago, the one with the county recorder's stamp on it. I searched the county records and discovered that on that very date, Alan had filed a completely different document, a gift deed, and the recipient's name was not Nathan. My heart started racing, but I kept that same old calm on my face, a calmness I had mastered through years of practice. If you want to find out what the real name on that gift deed was, and who Alan played his final move for, drop "I am ready" in the comments, because this next part is a twist you never saw coming. And the truth was, the name on that gift deed was Olivia Reed. My own name. 8 months before he passed, Alan had legally gifted the entire ownership of his apartment to me. It had a perfectly valid notary and the correct date, the exact same day I had picked up his rain-soaked letters. But Nathan caught wind of this when he forced his way into his uncle's old lawyer's office to snoop through the files. He was consumed by the fear that I was the rightful heir, not a servant, not a nosy neighbor, but the legally designated recipient. That is why he hastily cooked up a forged power of attorney using a notary whose commission had expired, assuming no one would ever bother to check the dates. But he had no idea who he was dealing with, a woman whose entire career revolves around making fake papers talk. The police showed up at my door that day because Nathan had falsely accused me of trying to steal the estate, figuring the burden of proof would be on me. He was dead wrong, because I had all the documents needed to tell the truth. I invited the police officers inside, calmly set my coffee mug on the table and pulled out my file. I showed them the gift deed with the county recorder's stamp and the valid notary number, and then the other document, Nathan's power of attorney, with a notary that had expired 19 months prior. I even pulled up the page on the state website where all notary commission dates are listed. Public record, no secrets, just information that nobody had bothered to double-check. The officers closed the case file, and the following week, Nathan's claim was thrown out of court. No shouting matches, no melodrama, just the sheer power of paperwork. I still live in that same apartment today, where Alan's reading chair sits right by the window. And whenever a new neighbor asks how I got this place, I simply smile. For years, I quietly untangled every mess my family made without a single complaint, thinking it was my duty. But Alan taught me that keeping the peace is not actually peace. It is just the rent we pay to make up for other people's mistakes. Catch you on Story Haven Daily for the next story.